Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Stage 2 workshop for Heritage Capital projects. I think you all have seen my name around. I'm Jay Barriston. I'm the Director of Heritage Outreach and manager of this program. And then with me today is David Sinjek, who is the Capital Projects, what is your title, David? Capital Projects Manager?
Coordinator.
Coordinator. So he works part-time on capital projects here at the museum, and then part-time with me on this program, and is really helpful in reviewing all those specific documents, particularly during the reimbursement process. So you're all here today because you've all started the application process, and hopefully you attended our first workshop where we basically just did a side-by-side with the application and the guidelines document, and we're planning to do much the same today. So my plan was to go ahead and list or have those two things side by side and step through the stage 2 version of the application, and basically just go through the whole thing, talk about each I'm gonna go ahead and mute some folks, and talk about each of the sections, and then open it up to questions at the end. So with that, I'll go ahead and share screen. Okay. So, as we discussed last workshop, my goal for updates to the guidelines this year was really to make it a document that could lay side by side with your application form, and it could give you direct instructions about how to fill it out, what the rules are, and everything that you need to know. So we will scoot forward in the guidelines since we are in stage 2 now. Scooting forward to stage 2. So before we get started, I will note that most of you had the application sent back for some minor edits, some major edits. There was a handful that that was able to go ahead and move forward right away. So if you're still working on editing and updating stage 1, that's totally fine. There's just a few benchmarks that we have that we really require and need people to pass before we get to stage 2, and just focus on that instead of putting you in front of the rest of the form, which is quite lengthy. So I've logged in to my test accounts here, and you'll notice that the invited for full proposal application form has an error at the top right away. And so don't be worried if you see an error at the top right away. That's mostly because the form is blank and you haven't filled the things in yet, but we have a few sort of automatically generated pieces. So don't worry if you see that right away. We're going to go ahead and go into edit mode. So we're starting with the section that you've already filled out. And everything in stage 1 can be edited in stage 2, except for, I believe, project type. I did make that not editable because certain fields display based on that field, and so I wanted it to be not changed. But as long as you basically are proposing the same project with the same site control, everything else is editable and changeable. So your budget numbers, your timeline, if that needs to get updated, even your personnel here in this first section. Don't worry if you have to change it from what you submitted in stage 1. It's all fairly flexible. Basically, we just need to make sure it's the same basic work that you're proposing and that you haven't changed your site control at all. So those are the kind of main big things that are not flexible. So you're welcome to update your personnel. If there was something, if any of this information has changed, or you'd like to provide any additional information about conflicts of interest, that will likely be done. If you had a conflict of interest issue in your stage 1 submission, probably that'll be addressed before you're in stage 2. But again, if you want to add something, if you got a new board member or something, you're welcome to add that here. And you'll notice that the new thing here in this first section of organization and personnel is a few additional attachments. So in the guidelines, it starts with just on the form, because that's we're jumping right into it. The form, there's nothing new that we added to the form other than these required attachments. So the balance sheet and operating budget will give the panel a little bit more of an idea of your organization's capacity, what other things that your organization does as far as programming, and how big of a percentage of your operating is this capital project, that type of thing. It just all is very helpful in understanding your capacity as an organization overall. I wanted to draw some attention to the formal resolution from the governing body. So this needs to be some type of approved statement or letter or something from the governing body that approves the submission of the grant and commits the match. So this is intended to basically prevent kind of one individual from submitting a grant application on behalf of an organization where the rest of the organization either doesn't know about it or hasn't seen it, hasn't approved it. The idea is to make sure that the full governing body is on board. So this can take some time to produce, especially for a city council or other kind of regulatory related body where you kind of have to get on a council schedule. So if you are an organization that is linked to a city council or a parks board or something that can take a while to get approved, I would move on this as quickly as possible. So I will note that we included, I should have looked up the page beforehand. We did include a sample in the guidelines. So this is page 58, so sample governing body resolution. And you don't need to use this exact language. You can adapt it as much as you need to, whatever, especially if you're a city council or other body that has some typical language that they prefer, that's fine. Basically, all we need to see is that the governing body is aware of and supports the project and the application and has committed that match that you're entering into the form. So you're welcome to use this, you're welcome to adapt it, you're welcome to use your own. It just needs to show that the governing body is on board. Okay, and that's all really for this first section that you need to add is some financial documents and that formal resolution. If you you can see in the guidelines also that if you wanted to put a motion in front of the board during a meeting and kind of attach the minutes, that's also fine if you want to do that. It's a little cleaner to have the resolution document because you can just upload it right there, but whatever works for your organization. If you have questions about that, let me know. Okay, so then the next section is project property. A lot of this will be will be filled in also. So this is not a new section, but there are a few new things to it. So we've got the visitation. A new section that we didn't ask for in stage 1 is this historical and cultural significance. So it says, please briefly describe. I would recommend being fairly brief with this. So we did put some character limits on this, and the panel is is reviewing so many of these applications, and there are so many attachments and so much going on that I would strongly recommend being very brief and succinct with this piece of it. And this is only for folks that whose projects involve a historic building. If your project doesn't involve a historic building, this section won't show up on your form, and you don't need to fill it out. I would recommend against attaching lots of extra documents like a National Register nomination or like a, history book that got written by a community member. Like the panel just doesn't have enough time to review pages and hundreds of pages about one individual property. So use this section here to really succinctly talk about the history and importance of your property for the panel to quickly understand and process that. This historical designation section is imported from your property profile. So if you remember during the first workshop, I showed you how to get into your property profile. So we will go ahead and do that again so I can show you where to get to that. So under properties, property profile, if you look down here, it's got a historical designation section. So you weren't required to fill this out for stage 1, but I do recommend filling it out for stage 2. You are not required to have any historical designation to be eligible for Heritage Capital, but it is helpful contextual information for the panel if that is applicable to your property. We'll go down and you can see that the National Register, the Washington State Register, it's just a bunch of series of clicks and check boxes to check which ones apply to your property, the name of a district if it's in a district, and to go ahead and fill this out if it applies. Emily, yeah, do you have a question? Or can it wait till the end or be added to the chat? Okay. All right. So we go back to our application form. So as I mentioned, this will all just be pulled automatically from the form. So you can't edit it here. You have to go into the property record to edit this information. And then if it is locally designated, let us know who at the city or county level you're working with on reviews to make sure that your project is following the local ordinance. So now to DAP consultation, tribal and DAP consultation. So as I mentioned in stage 1, the State Historical Society will be managing the initial tribal outreach and collecting all of the information from stage 1 after we're able to get everybody moved forward, and sending that information to tribes for their response. But you are still responsible for working with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, DAHP. So this first date was the date that you initiated consultation with them, which typically is that you send them the easy review form. And then the next date you enter is the date you heard back from them. So this may be a few weeks away. It depends on how much back and forth there's going to need to be about your project, about your property. So you may not be able to fill this in right away if they're still reviewing. And then there's a drop down here for the determination that they made about the property and the proposal that you submitted. So a few additional attachments that we would like to see attached are the easy review form that you submitted. So this is so that we can see that the project you described in the easy form matches the project that you're proposing to us. And then the signed letter of determination, which is their response to you. So you're going to have to upload the easy form to them or email it and then upload it here as well. So we can just kind of see everything that was reviewed by DAP. And then under properties, we also have an optional document that could be helpful for the panel, if you have any facilities plans or other things that you think would, in addition to the site plan and other photos that you've already uploaded, if there's any facilities plans or more detailed documents about the facility, it's just, even suggested is maybe too strong a word. It's an optional thing. If you have it, if you don't worry about it. It's just, some folks have a little bit more technical documents related to their properties than others. So that's another item that you might upload in this property section for context for the panel. Okay. And here in the guidelines, we do kind of just describe what each of those DAP determinations mean for context. And then on the form, as I said, property information can be updated if needed that was previously added. Here's a little bit about historic and cultural significance. And in the guidelines, I didn't include the determination letter when I didn't. In the past, they've sent signed forms back to us, and now that Maddie they've personnel changes over at DAP have also changed their process. So now they actually prefer the letter as the response rather than signing the form and sending it back. So the letter is not listed here, but it is on the form. So it can get a little confusing. If you have any issues or questions about this as far as it relates to your review with DAP, let me know. And we'll figure out what's correct for your project. But basically, we're just missing the letter of determination as an attachment here. Okay. Moving along to project proposal. So this is also a section that you will have already filled out, but is one where we ask for a few more attachments. So again, if you need to update your project summary over the next few months, until June 7th, until the deadline, if things change or adjust, you may do so. Again, with the timeline, if you need to adjust those elements of work, change the dates, you're welcome to do so. And then the attachments. So this is where you will upload all your contextual project documents. So we'll need to see cost estimates, and these are all described here in detail in the guidelines. So cost estimate is from, a contractor, an architect, some professional in the building trade that has looked at your project and estimated costs. You may submit internally generated cost estimates, but if you do that, it's really a lot less reliable of a number, and that does speak to sort of a lack of preparation for the project. So we don't recommend that. So we really recommend that you talk to at least one professional about your project and are submitting cost estimates that come from someone who does capital work for a living. If you have multiple different phases or portions of your project that relate to different trades and different professions, like you've got a roof and then some landscaping, try to get a bid from a roofer and a bid from a landscaper, because you'll probably be using two different companies for that. So again, if you have to guess on some of the numbers, we can accept some of that, but that does just sort of show a little bit less preparation.
Hey Jay, I'd love to jump in on talk just real quick about escalation, and let people know that it is okay and encouraged to include escalation. If your bid was from last year and you're not going to be doing the work until the summer of 2025, you can include escalation, what you think it's going to be for your area, and if it's reasonable, it'll look favorably on your application because it'll show that you're planning. That's all.
That's right. Yep. No, that's absolutely right. So increase of material costs, increase of labor costs. A lot of the work you're proposing now, like David said, isn't going to happen until June of 2025. or July, excuse me. And so you are able to put in sort of some inflation or contingency for increase in prices. As well, if you have a historic property, put in some contingency for unknown. Like, you don't know what you're going to find until you take that wall panel off and see what's actually inside. So best practice is to have that professional be making that estimate, helping you make that estimate. But even if you can't, go ahead and add some of that contingency in yourself when you're working on your budget. And then in the guidelines, I do say here, submitting a bid or an estimate from a contractor in your application does not obligate you to use that contractor. It's just to get a relatively reliable ballpark number for the cost of the project so that the panel can see. Obviously, the panel can't, visit every single project and get details themselves about it. So having a professional give a number, but it doesn't obligate you to use them. If you need to switch contractors, if that contractor ends up not being able to fit you on the schedule, you're fine to do that. And for the purposes of grants, we don't require you to have multiple bids. If you do, that's helpful. That's more, that's more information for you to know that the contractors are hitting similar numbers, but you only need one for the purposes of the grant, and you don't have to do any sort of public request for proposals for our purposes. Some cities and counties are required to do that for their own purposes, but for us, you're not required to do that for the grant. Okay. Next attachment on the form is documentation of partner commitment. So this is different than community support. Partner commitment is something that where there's a third party who is contributing a significant amount to the physical work or managerial work of the project. So this is like if there's a project with the city where the property is owned by the city and they're partnering with the historical society to do the interpretation or to run the building, you need to have a letter from the historical society saying, we're a partner with the city on this major project, and this is our role, and this is how much we're involved in this project. Similarly, if your landlord, if the owner of your building is doing improvements to the property and you're counting that as an in-kind match, and it's a significant amount, or there's some large piece that this third party is contributing to the project, then you need that person to submit a letter or other proof of commitment, if it's a contract, whatever makes sense to attach here. So this is not public support or just sort of general public other partners in the community that are excited about your project. This is someone who's integral to the processes and execution of the project itself. That's what partner commitment is. And not everyone will have this. Some folks are doing it on their own. It's all kind of internal. It's all within their sort of capacity, and that's totally fine. But if you are relying heavily on a third party or a major partner, you need to include documentation from them that they're on board. And then we have a couple other technical documents here that are suggested if you have them. So architectural engineering planning documents or historic structures reports and conditions assessments. So again, these are not required. We have a lot of smaller projects that end up kind of, just being handled by a contractor and aren't necessarily, there's not the need for full-on design and schematics. That's fine. But if you do have those design and schematic drawings, because your project is a little bit larger or a little more complex, go ahead and attach those here. All right. Moving on to scope of work. So this is a new section that you will see. And what this is it takes that framework that you created in your timeline, which we were calling elements of work, which a lot of you got notes from from me about, oh, let's consolidate here or fix this here. And that's because in this section, you're detailing out each of those. And for kind of more simple projects, usually there's like, 1 to 3 elements of work. So if it's literally just a roof replacement, that's one element of work. And we detail it out in the description area here about like we're taking off the old roof and installing the new one, and maybe some gutters and some other vents and different things. And then that's just one element of work. For more complex projects where you're building a whole new building or there's multiple, multiple buildings being worked on, that's going to have a lot more elements of work listed out. So what we would really like to see is that each element of work here matches the list that you put in your timeline. Oops, I went a little too far. Sorry, don't make people seasick. So this list, these elements of work, ideally would be the same as the elements listed here. If you want to adjust or consolidate or expand a little bit, that's fine. But the idea is that the timeline will show the elements, the scope will do will detail out the specific physical work, and then we will translate this into a contract document if you are recommended for funding. And the scope of work in the contract document will be based on this framework here. So you'll see that for this form, it has kind of 2 columns, and that's because we've broken out the detailed description of the work. So again, if it's a roof replacement, then you're saying you're taking off the old one, you're installing this type of product and vents and gutters, etc. And then in the historic standards, field, you say, and we've chosen this type of roofing because it's compatible with the historic, character of the building. So if you do not have a project that involves historic buildings, you actually won't see this. So that's why I had the project type not editable, because it'll affect what you see on the form. So the scope of work will not automatically populate from your timeline. I'm sorry, you'll have to re-enter those element titles. But the way that you add one is that you click, it says add an element of work, you click on this plus button, and you'll get, you'll enter the title, and then you will add your detailed description of the work. So this should include, the physical work that's happening. What are the detailed steps that you're taking to accomplish that element of work? And then describe what steps you're taking for that work to adhere to historic standards. And then hit save, and then it will display here. You can also go back and edit them. So you can see that this placeholder text here, you can go and edit it and save it. Or if you click the red button, it'll delete the record. It'll delete it and it will disappear. So the scope is really the heart of the detailed description of the work that is being communicated to the panel. So I anticipate folks will have questions about the level of detail that they should get into here. So if you want to draft something up and send it to us and say, is this the right level of detail for this type of element of work? That would be great. That could be a good way to go. And just kind of making sure you're on the right track to communicate clearly to the panel. And then in the attachment section for the scope of work, what we want to see are all the detail photos of the areas of the building or vessel or locomotive that are in need of the work. So if you're talking about the roof, upload some pictures of the current state of the roof. If you're replacing windows, upload the current or repairing, hopefully, if they're historic windows, upload pictures of those windows in bad shape. Several of you uploaded detail photos in the project property section. So I would recommend moving those down here. I don't think that there's a way to just move them down. You'll have to delete them from the other section and move them and then re-upload them here. The property section should really be just general photos, each side of the building and the setting as the title of the documents. Document titles say, and then those specific project areas of the deteriorating paint and the damaged windows should all really be in here, so that the panel can see literally in the detailed description of the work exactly what physical spaces that work is going to be done in. And it's really important to pay attention, and it's all detailed in the guidelines, to pay attention to which documents you're uploading in which section. Because if you're uploading the wrong documents in the different sections, that's going to make it much more difficult for the panel to understand your project and to review your documents. So if you are confused, I know that the system is a little complicated. Let me know. I can help you rearrange documents and let you know which documents should be uploaded where. Like I say, it is all detailed out in the guidelines, but if you're reading through the guidelines, you're still not sure, reach out and we can help you. I would much rather you submit a cleanly organized application with all the documents in the places where the panel is expecting to see them than to have them try to like scroll up and down your application to try to find the documents in random places. So I know there were several applications that uploaded, like I say, prematurely, documents that are asked for in stage 2 and stage 1. So those are all in the wrong places. Again, you'll have to delete those and re-upload them in the correct places. All right. In the guidelines, I do have a short description of the Secretary of the Interior standards. These are the historic standards. If you need more guidance on this, myself or folks at DAP can help with kind of what is appropriate treatments for historic buildings. If you're unsure of, if you have a building that's a historic one and you're unsure of best practices, let us know and we can talk through that with your specific project. And then it has the elements of work description, Secretary of the Interior standards, which is the historic standards, and then the images of the project areas here in the guidelines. Okay. Next section is one you've seen before. Again, all of these numbers can change between your stage 1 and stage 2 if needed. If your match is if you're still getting numbers on bids and budgets and things like that, and you need to increase or decrease, that is totally fine. I will say, once you submit stage 2 on June 7th, those numbers cannot change. That is the number that will be sent to the legislature, and that is the number that will be awarded if approved by the panel and then the legislature. So by June 7th, the numbers can't change or increase, even if your project goes over budget later. The number is set from the application on June 7th, and does not change. So that should be all familiar to you. And then in the attachment section, we have we ask for a more detailed project budget. So our budget form is very broad. It only has 3 different types of numbers. So construction, rehab, design and pre-construction, and then property acquisition, which is very, very broad based. But we would like to see a more detailed breakout of how you came to those numbers. And instead of trying to fit dozens of different projects into one type of form, we've left it open-ended so that you can create your own project budget and submit it and let us know how you got to those numbers. We did include another sample for this attachment. And I went ahead and organized the sample project budget here by potential elements of work, because that's how we ask you to organize your scope. That's how we ask you to organize your timeline. And so I think it would be helpful for us if you organized your project budget by those same elements of work. And then over here, I have these are the bids that these numbers are referring to, which would have been uploaded in the earlier section of the project section of the application. So just kind of referencing here where each of these numbers came from, what each of the numbers is going to, and as David brought up, which was great, a contingency here for 20% added to the budget numbers. So this is one way that a budget could be organized to show that level of detail. If you have a different budget that you've been working with, that's fine. Go ahead and upload that. We're not intending to create a bunch of extra work if you've already been working on a budget and you have your own documents organized around the project. But the budgets you upload should be clearly related to the information in the application. So if you have a very large project that HCP is only funding a portion of, you're going to need to be clear in the budget documents and other documents which pieces actually relate to the project. So that's just make sure that it's clearly communicated and that we can easily see like, yes, this is the items in the scope that they listed, and here's the numbers that they got from their contractors, and then all those totals are represented here in these three categories as well. Okay, moving on to match income. Oops, went a little too far. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this today because this is the most confusing part of the application for a lot of people. So we require you to document where your match is coming from. That's for a few different reasons. One is to make sure that it's committed. So you're not just saying, oh yeah, we have $100,000 and it's, we're kind of just guessing that when you say that, you mean that. So that there's documentation that the money that you say you do have. Another reason is to make sure that you're not counting other state grants. So if you've gotten, grants from the Department of Commerce or from us or from direct appropriations from your legislators through the community projects funds, none of those dollars can count as match for HCP. So there is a lot of confusion in this section between the income and the expenses. So if you are planning to use work you've already completed on the project as your match, that's great. That work that you completed, you earned money a certain way and then spent that money on specific expenses. And what we want to see here in the match income is what money you used on those expenses. So you should not be listing expenses here, like going back to the roof. If you already replaced the roof and you're using that as match to do your siding, you don't list, roofing invoice here. You would list what money did you spend to get your roof done. And then later, if and when you're awarded a grant, when we go through the reimbursement process, and that's when you say, here's the roof that was done, here's the amount that it costs, and here's all the expense documentation. Here we're looking for, where did the money come from that paid for it? The income that went to your organization that paid for the work, or the income that you have that will go toward future work, or the income that you're expecting based on reasonable predictions, such as income from rentals or pledges or different things like that. So like I say, this is the most confusing part for people because the distinction between income and expenses is sometimes a little tricky. The income will typically be in the form of money that you earn. So like like membership fees, property leases, facility rentals, things that your organization does to earn money. It can be a grant that you've gotten that is local or federal or private. It's the foundation. Just can't be other state grants or other state money, like an appropriation. A gift or donation. So just, somebody donated $50,000 to your capital campaign, and that's great. Or in-kind contributions from a third party of labor, materials, or property donation. So those are typically the kind that we see. And if you have something that you want to count as match that doesn't fall into one of these categories, reach out, let me know, and we can figure out a way to include it or describe it appropriately. So the match needs to be committed on June 7th. You have to demonstrate 75% of your match. So basically 3/4 of what you're planning to spend on your project. Then you have the next year until the grant cycle starts to get the rest of that 25% if you're not quite there. If you go ahead and put 100% of your match, like maybe you're using all past expenses and it's all already done and you've already done that work and you list all the income that you used to do that work and you're at 100%, great. That's less work you have to do when we start contracting, and we need to fill in the rest of that income demonstration. So I have in here a section, how do I show match income? So what are you actually showing us? What are you actually attaching to your application to demonstrate that you have the money to spend on the project that you say you do? So for instance, cash on hand or savings, how did you earn that money? Who gave it to you? How did it get into your bank account? If you're using a savings account or money that, that you set aside years ago for this purpose, you may not be able to track that really precisely. And if that's the case, talk to us and we'll figure out what would be the best way to demonstrate that money in the application. Because we really need to know the source of the funds in order to make sure that your funds are eligible. So I said previous funds already spent on project work. So where did the cash come from? So not invoices, but where did you get the money that paid your contractors? Future grants or gifts or earning you're anticipating. You need to demonstrate that those future grants or gifts are reasonably anticipated. So who's going to be giving it to you? What grant are you expecting? Some document that shows that it's reasonably expected. Previous in-kind donations. You need to show who donated what and what the value of it was. And then future in-kind donations, who will be donating what is the value, and that donation is committed. Okay, so now getting into the form. How do you put all of this detailed income information into the form? So it's a little bit of a different format here. I have the required attachments are individual to the type of income that you're reporting. So to add a match income source, you come in here, hit the plus button, and then you give it a name, like your 2023 capital campaign. What kind of income is it? So there's a bunch of different options here. Choose the one that you think is best. So typically a capital campaign is a gift or a donation. And we have it broken out here into greater than 10,000 or less than 10,000. So if someone gives your organization more than $10,000 in one donation, we'll need to see an individual documentation of that gift. So that's, a letter, preferably a check, maybe a line item on a bank statement that major gift was made. If it's a combination of a bunch of smaller gifts, what we need to see is a summary of those gifts and how you got that number. So typically a capital campaign is well, I guess there's no typical on a capital campaign. Some capital campaigns have big donors, some have all small donors. There's a wide variety, but let's, for instance, say that this is going to be a campaign that we got a lot of small donations for. So we're going to say that the year was 2023, and the amount that we totaled was $8,500. So we got a bunch of donations totaling $8,500. In fact, maybe I'll change it to what I included in the sample, which I've got another sample document for you here in the appendix. So here are individual donations samples. So I don't know that I can do this math very well, but you can see the capital campaign here, and I've detailed out the numbers. You are welcome to break this out into 3 different ways. You can just say small donations from these years, you know, just organize it in whatever way makes sense for how the income came to you. So if, and this is not totaling $8,500, but the total amount doesn't have to be less than $10,000. This could be $20,000 made up of donations that are less than 10. It's the individual donations that matter. So this is the type of information that we would be looking for. So like a report out of your QuickBooks or whatever software you use, spreadsheet you use to track donations. Let us know what you, how you got that number that's going towards your project. Click save, it'll show up here, and you may have to click the save button on the form to update these calculations to show where you're at. See if it uploaded. Oops, there it is. Okay, so 18,500 now. Those have uploaded. So another one I want to call attention to is the in-kind section, or the in-kind options here. So professional labor is if a professional is donating their time to your project. Let's say you have an architect who says, I will charge you half my normal rate. So you're going to pay, so that's going to be a separated, or not separated, but that's going to be kind of a 2-part income. You're gonna pay that contractor half his wage, or that architect, but then the other half is going to be the in-kind donated labor. And so that's a value that you can include here. And you can include it at that professional's professional rate. So it doesn't have to be the volunteer amount. It can be whatever they would have charged. They're donating that value to your project. Volunteer labor, so this is sort of general labor. You know, depending on the project, you could have a lot, or maybe there's not a lot that could really be done by a volunteer. If they're cleaning up a site, if they're painting, maybe. The volunteer labor, though, does have to be directly related to the physical work of the project. It has to be capital. It can't be board meetings or planning sessions or sort of these other general operations stuff. It has to be work spent on the project, working with a contractor, project managing or planning specifically for the physical work, not kind of long range organizational planning and things like that. And that's valued at $37 an hour this cycle, based on just some sort of statistics of volunteer labor value in Washington State that we combined. So donated materials and supplies. So this is if someone else purchases or has on hand materials or supplies that they're going to give to the organization to use on the project. This means that the organization didn't pay for it. So it's a donation from a third party, whether that's the board president is like, oh, hey, I've got some stuff I can donate to the project. Great, that's a donation. In kind does not mean it. People sometimes get confused that in kind means it's coming from the organization. It's actually the opposite. Cash expenses is what the organization is spending. In kind is something that someone else is spending or donating to the project. Donated property. And then expenditures of a third party. So if your landlord or a project partner is planning to pay for part of your project. So say your landlord says, I'll pay for your roof if you do all the siding and the windows, and then the landlord pays the contractor. That's an in-kind donation because it's not an expense of the application, the organization who is submitting the application. So cash is what the organization who is on the application is spending, and in-kind is any other expense or donation from any other third party. So if you have a major partner who's also spending money on the project that you want to use as match, we have to be careful that that's not more than 50% of the match if it's a large project. So again, if you have a major partner who's also spending money, we'll need to be sure to track that level of in-kind to make sure it doesn't go over the amount. Okay. So you're going to go ahead and list all of the income, all of the money coming to your organization or being donated to your project in this section. And the totals should match the totals in your budget. So your total proposed match and your total proposed match should match the amount of match that I'm seeing here. This match, it can be more, it can be over if you want. If you want to show a little bit of extra, you can, but it needs to be at least as much or more as what is represented in your budget. I anticipate we will have questions about this section once we get through. All right. We let us carry through to the end, and then we will have a long question and answer session. So in here, in the guidelines for this match income, I described each of what that drop down menu, each item on that drop down menu in detail. And so hopefully this shows you exactly the document you need to attach. And I think that I don't think I detailed that. So the capital campaign, in addition to listing the numbers in the form, click on the plus sign to upload a document that I showed you in the appendix, something similar to that shows the number that you're including. So if you have a grant, you would add the grant letter here. If you have donated materials or supplies, you attach the letter of donation from the donor, some type of physical document that shows that you have the money or are receiving or will receive the money that you're saying that you will. So sorry, that was a big piece I didn't mention. You do need to attach a documentation of the numbers you're putting in here. And in this section, I've detailed out what we would expect to see. But if you have a different document or a different way of demonstrating it, let me know, and we can review it and see if it's going to be sufficient. Okay. Moving on to project narrative. This is not a new section from last round, or sorry, excuse me, this has been in the Heritage Capital application previously, but we do have a little bit more information in the guidelines about it this year. It is new in the sense of stage 1 versus stage 2. So we've split the questions out into sort of the 5 areas where the panel will be assigning points to your application. We have prompts on the form for you to describe the project purpose and how your organization is providing public access to history. And then in the guidelines, we have some questions, and these are just prompts. These are just to help guide you in answering the question. You do not need to answer every single question. You just need to respond to what's on the form. But if you're not really sure how to describe that or what we might be looking for or what might be helpful for the panel, we've added these questions to just sort of get things flowing, get ideas going for your application. So as I said, you're not required to answer every single one of these, but these are just some ways that some ideas and questions that might help you to answer this main question on the form. And then there are some sections like project planning where a lot of your documents that you attached earlier are going to apply to how ready you are to complete or to execute and complete this project, right? So if you, in this section, feel free to refer to the other documents, like as our budget shows, or as our bids from our contractors show, we went and got all these bids and we're ready to move forward because we've been talking with professionals and know exactly the sequencing and the cost and all these things that are going into the project. So use this to kind of add narrative to the rest of your application, and then also communicate to the panel kind of the community value and the public access to history piece, which I would say you need to be explicit about. You can't just say, well, it's a historic building, therefore it has value. I think you need to demonstrate and describe, the interpretation that you're doing. How is the public learning about this place? How is the public experiencing this place? Really go into detail about the public benefit and value that you're bringing. I suppose maybe it would be good to go through each of these. So yeah, that public value and benefit is the main piece of this project purpose. And that will also be translated into your grant contract. So when if you are awarded a grant, and that we have an attachment called project purpose, and that is how you're providing public access to history, and you will be required to continue to maintain to continue providing that public access to history for those 13 years of monitoring that is required for the grant. So for some of you, that might just be, this is our mission. We are a museum. We provide interpretive, we do exhibits, we do tours, we do this and that, and we will continue to do that. And it's like real easy, real simple. For others, it might be a little more complicated, because if you're a city, maybe you're partnering with a historical society or a different partner, and you need to describe that relationship and describe the roles. Well, the city's going to do this and the partner's going to do that. If you're a historic building that is not a museum, you'll need to provide some type of interpretive experience, some type of learning experience. That doesn't have to be a bunch of exhibits, but it could be some brochures or some digital tools or a little bit of signage around the building, something so that the public is experiencing and learning about history. So that's project purpose. For community value, it's related, but a little bit different. And that's kind of, how is this affecting your specific local community and sort of contributing more broadly. So what's the need? What other long-term public benefits will this project have? You can describe a little bit more about the significance of the property in your community today. If it's a historic building and that's the only one left of that kind in your town, that's an interesting thing to include. What's the public support? Who are other project partner or project folks in the community who support the project? Things like that. So project planning, describe your organization's readiness to initiate and complete a well-planned and cost-effective project. As I mentioned, some of this will need to reference the other documents and things you've attached. But just describe your process for planning out this project. Where are you in the planning process? Are you counting things that you've already done and therefore like 2/3 of the project is already finished? How did you prioritize the scope of work? Who did you work with on that? Just show the panel the sort of thought and planning process you went through to put the application together, which will then contribute to being able to effectively execute that project. We find that a lot of grant applications that are sort of put together at the last minute, or put together without very much detail, are typically the projects that struggle if they're granted. Those are the folks that, because they haven't thought through those details or put that plan together, it's much harder for them to actually execute and do the project later down the road. So the more thought and detail you can explain of how you've been planning this project, the better. And then that will also typically, we see, translate into project execution as well. So organizational capacity is who's on your team and do they have experience with this? And if what other things have they done that will give the panel confidence that they can do the project you've proposed? So do you have experience with other grant funded projects, with other capital projects, working with professional consultants? Again, you don't have to answer every one of these. You don't have to have experience in all of these, but if you have some experience with working with contractors, that's an important thing to say. Like, oh yeah, we managed a capital project 5 years ago and worked with contractors, and we were able to manage those contracts and get them paid on time, and it was a very smooth process, something like that. Who on the team will manage the projects? What's their experience with it? Who's going to be documenting and submitting reports to the HCP staff team? So there's both the management of the physical work of the project itself, but then management of all of the expenses and documentation that goes along with that. And then if you have consultants or contractors that you've already identified and are already committed, that's great. Again, that's not required. You can change those in the future if you need to, but if you do already have them committed and they're ready to go, that's a capacity that you have that you should share. All right, organizational stability refers to planning for the future. So for Heritage Capital, hopefully you all understand that if you are awarded a grant, you are required to maintain this capital project and provide public access to history for 13 years after your project is completed. That is basically the state's way of protecting the investment in the project and public access to history. So in this section, you're going to describe your plan to do that and how stable your organization is and how able you are to do that. So who's managing the facility? Do you have plans for maintenance costs? If your project is a collection or an archive, do you have a good collections management team in place and plan in place for your collection? Do you have staff that are, trained in facilities or collections, or are you planning to get them trained in facilities and collections? Do you follow professional standards? Again, you don't have to address each of these, but these are some ways that you can show, yes, we have a collections management plan, or if it's for a museum, we follow AAM standards or AASLH standards for interpretation and exhibits and different things, and we provide quality public access to history. We've been in operation for this many years and have a great relationships in the community, and we'll continue to operate our museum in perpetuity, et cetera, et cetera. So describing that sort of position of your organization to be able to continue the work that you're doing for 13 years after project completion, including that public access to history, but also maintaining the building. All right. And we are the home stretch here. After the narrative, we have kind of some supporting or other attachments that you all might be interested in including as context for the panel. You can add more. So if you click on these buttons next to these titles, it will automatically label the attachment with this title. But you can also click on this button and include other documents or other, documents with other titles once you add files. In fact, I can just kind of show you. If you drag something over, you can select from the document type menu here. It'll show all the other ones earlier in the document in the form as well. But you can also just choose this other document if you have something that's not on this list, but you think it's really important and relevant to your project. Go ahead and add it. So letters of support from the community, this is where you would add those just sort of general letters of support. So earlier it was critical project partners who are helping the project itself happen. And here is where you add any other sort of more general letters of support of people who are just supportive and can demonstrate that community value that you've described here in your narrative. Strategic plan, that can help demonstrate organizational stability and also project purpose. It's not required. If you have a small organization that, you know, hasn't undergone a strategic plan, that's okay. But if you do and you have some clearly identified goals and things that you're working toward, that's a great thing to demonstrate because it shows intentionality. Collections plans, especially, I would say actually really only if your project has to do with your collections facility is this really required. It's more that, you know, if you're specifically asking for a grant to build a new collection storage facility or you know, add compact shelving or make HVAC upgrades to your collections, if the state is going to be investing in those collections, it would be good to show, you know, how you manage your collections. Collections plans can be very, very detailed. They can be simple. If you don't have one now, that's okay. If you do have a collections related grant, we might, as we contract with you, say, okay, well, you've been awarded a grant. It's for a collections facility. Why don't we put a plan in place for in 2 years you'll have a collections plan approved. So that could be something that comes in the future, even if you don't have it now. Interpretive plans can demonstrate how you provide that public access to history, you know, what type of exhibits and planning that you're doing in your facility, whether that's specifically a museum or if it's a little bit less, you know, if it's more of a historic building where there's a little bit less interpretation happening, but you still have a plan to do that. And then an org chart we added here. If you have a large organization and there's lots of different people involved, an org chart can help show capacity for all the things that we've been talking about as far as like 13-year sustainability, project planning, public access to history, you know, sharing, we have this many staff that do interpretation, we have this many volunteers that do, you know, that are docents and different things like that. Okay, so that is the end of the form, but I wanted to also show you that the criteria and scoring are going to be based on those 5 categories. And like I said, it's not just the narrative that's being evaluated. Of course, everything above it too contributes to the narrative, but the points are based around those questions that we asked. So the grant is due June 7th, which is a Friday. And then David and I will be reviewing all of those applications. We will be checking for key factors like your match income. Did you provide 75%? Did you provide all those attachments that are required? David and I don't review for quality in the sense of like reviewing the content and how you know, how well written or argued your application is. We just review, did you meet the minimum threshold of providing the match and showing the right dates in your timeline, and that you don't, you know, that your budget makes sense, that you submitted a budget, and these types of things. So we don't really review for quality. We just review to make sure all the pieces are there so that the panel can then read through and evaluate the quality and do their scoring. So that will happen in June. We'll transfer the that usually takes several weeks because there's a lot of stuff to get through. We will transfer the applications to the panel. We're aiming for early July. They'll have several weeks to review, and then the public meeting is scheduled for early September. We don't have a location for that just yet, but once we do have that planned, you will all receive an invitation where the panel will they will have reviewed and scored the applications ahead of time, and then they will come together to discuss all of the scores and applications together. It's a really helpful process because there's some, we have a panel with a wide variety of expertise. So it's helpful for some folks that pay attention to, we have historic preservation folks, we have museums folks, we have collections folks, we have engineers. And so each of those individuals can kind of evaluate from their own perspective and share that perspective with each other. And then we give folks the opportunity to adjust their points if needed. So at the end of that meeting, they will come together with a final ranked list, and then that is what will be submitted to the legislature for funding up to $10 million. Okay, that was a whirlwind. That was a lot. Let me go ahead and stop sharing. All right. If I need to reshare or bring up other information, we can. I'm actually going to quickly close my office door because there's a bit of a commotion happening outside. So be thinking of your questions. We'll start in the chat and start answering those questions, and I will be right back. Okay, let's start in the chat. We have about 45 minutes. Hopefully we can get through everybody's questions. And like I said, we can refer back. I can rescreen share and refer back to the form as needed. Okay, and I see David has already been answering a lot of these, so maybe we can move through them quickly and then get to other questions. So Holly asks, would that need to be in the form of our board of directors, or would a resolution from our senior leadership team be sufficient? I think she's referring to the resolution from the governing body, and that needs to be the board of directors. So yeah, it needs to be the leadership, so the board that has the sort of legal responsibility for the organization. So that would be a board of directors. The entire board does not have to sign, but you'll see in the, and this is Lissa's question, but it should be, the entire board should have participated in the decision. So if you have that resolution document, it needs to, the board should read it and know what it says, and either, attest in some way, whether that's in a board meeting or that it's approved. If your organization allows via email, that's fine too. The board should be aware of it, but not the entire board has to sign. You'll notice in the sample document, it basically said, I attest that the board of directors supports this resolution, and it's just signed by the board president. And then David said yes, to have there should be enough present to have a vote at whatever quorum your organization requires. Kelly says, if the building is owned by the city, but the nonprofit has control, is it necessary to have two resolutions, one from the governing body of the nonprofit, one from the city? And David said, nope, just the org that is applying, and that's correct. So it's the board that's responsible, fiscally responsible for the application itself, because the organization on the application is the organization with whom we will have a contract, and you will be responsible for those grant funds and following all the terms of the contract that you have with us. And so that's the board that we need the agreement from. And Lua asks if the guidelines are on the website. Yep, and David said the link. Is there a suggested limit on how old a cost estimate can be? David says the more recent, the better. There's not, we don't have a specific one. I would say if it's more than 2 or 3 years, David, I don't know if you want to chime in on this, that's pretty old. I mean, it's better than nothing, but the materials and labor changes so quickly that I would say if it's more than 2 or 3 years old, that would not be preferred. How would you
Yeah, I
feel with
agree.
that?
Even anything over a year right now, because we've had so many projects that have had to cut scope because of the um higher prices than what they estimated three or 4 years ago in a lot of cases.
Yeah, so if you have an estimate that's 2 or 3 years old now, by the time the project starts, it's going to be 6 or 7 years old. So, so yeah, it's really best to have as recent as possible if you can. If we have board members and ED who are experts in the area of work, can we use their cost estimates, or do we need a third party? Third party is better, but like I said earlier, those internally generated numbers can be submitted. Again, it just goes to sort of because the board members are not the ones, I assume, going to be doing the work. So it goes to the preparation of your organization and the readiness of your project. If you've already talked to contractors who could do this work and you've already sort of initiated that piece, it demonstrates more readiness. And David, they also asked about there's lots of back and forth here about a standard percent for escalation inflation. Yeah, we've
I
talked about
just
this
actually
before.
found that it's you're gonna laugh. It's 3.3% for the biennium.
3.3.
Yeah.
That seems insufficient to me.
Everybody's complaining about costs going up 20%. I don't know where they came up with 3.3, but that is annual. So you would do it over the, every year. So it's compounding.
We've used a different number in the past.
That's the
though.
that's the OFM published rate right now.
Okay.
If we want to allow more than that, we probably could. I think we can talk about that.
Yeah, I think 20 is pretty. 15 to 20 is typically what we see from folks in the
That's
industry.
realistic.
And more realistic. We'll have to check and see if the state restricts that, or if we can kind of based on this specific grant program and its specific needs, in the industry wide, what is a typical number? All right. Lissa asks about escalation costs. Yes, add them in stage 2, increase your numbers. Totally fine. Obviously, if you're already asking for the full million, which there was a handful of, you can't go beyond that. So that's a limitation. But if you're not at the full million yet and you want to add escalation costs, please do. You will, of course, need to then show compensatory match. So you still have to do the 2-to-1 match and demonstrate that for any additional expenses that you're calculating for. Does the scope of work include the last 5 to 6 years match work? Yes. Great question, Peggy. Yes. So we're trying to catch all of that in the timeline piece from stage 1. So anything that's match, anything that's going toward the project as a whole, has to be described in the timeline, has to be included in the timeline and described in the scope of work. So even if it's already done, anything that from the past 6 years, if you're using past work, that is included in the scope, because we will be asking for documentation of that work as demonstration of your match in the future when you're wanting to get your grant money reimbursed. So all of that needs to be described. That's actually a really big piece that a lot of people miss. And then it causes a lot of problems later in contracting to then have to add a bunch of stuff for that match. So anything that's match, anything that's grant, it all has to be included in the scope of work and be detailed as if it's, it's already done, but detail it out as if you're writing a scope of work for that project. Danae, go ahead.
Sorry. To that point, does it need to be directly related to the project that you are requesting funds for? So let's say the building has had some work done on it in the past 6 years, but you're asking for funds for something very specific that's not related, that you haven't used the match toward. In my example, or in my situation, I'm wanting to do ADA ramps to the historic sites, but we've done other work on the building in the past 6 years. So do I include that in as match, or do I not include that in as match because it's not related to the ramps?
Excellent question, Danae. This is also a really big question for the whole program. So what I would say is, first you need to distinguish between maintenance and capital. And in the guidelines, we have in the appendix, there's some more text about this, but basically maintenance is not eligible for our program. So, you know, like small repairs, general costs that are pretty much annual or biannual are not eligible. That's maintenance. Capital is major physical permanent improvements to a structure. So start off, only capital is eligible. You can't add maintenance. However, if you had done a capital project 2 years ago, like you're talking about ramps, you know, if you had replaced the roof 2 years ago, sorry, I keep getting hung up on roof replacements. It's just an easy one. If you had replaced the roof 2 years ago, that's not really connected to the ramps in sort of a functional way, other than they both contribute to the building. So but you can use that as match because it was a capital major permanent improvement. So what I would suggest then is that you propose a project that is sort of described more as a larger rehab project, which includes the roof, which includes access via ramps, which includes maybe there's some other work that you're adding. You have to describe all of those pieces as the umbrella of the project you're proposing. And it can be sort of different large elements that all basically just contribute to the functionality of the building. They don't have to be directly tied to each other like a roof and some ADA ramps, but they're both contributing to the preservation of the building and the functionality, and then public access. So you could describe that as like rehabilitation and public access for X building. So, and then that would be kind of a capital project composed of a few different parts related to different areas of the building. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much.
Great. Yep. So the first most important piece is to distinguish between capital and maintenance. And then if you do have several different capital pieces, to describe them as one large project with different components or phases. All right. David said we'll work on getting some information about the escalation and do a little bit more work on getting a better number for that. What's the best way to reach out with questions, phone or email? Email's usually the best way to get a quicker response. I try to answer my phone when I can, but I'm often in meetings and we'll have only short breaks between meetings and I'm not able to call back. I would say if you reach out with an email and it needs to be a longer conversation, we can then schedule something a time to chat on the phone. Yeah, if you have a lot of questions or a complex question, in my email signature, there's a schedule a meeting with me here link, which will take you to a calendar which shows when I'm available, and that will schedule a half-hour meeting with me. And you can choose to have that on Zoom, Teams, or by phone. And so that's a good way if you know you have a bunch of different questions and you want to chat with me. That's actually the easiest way to make sure I'll be able to answer the phone when you want to chat, because there are just a lot of meetings going around these days. All right. If you, Danae asks, if you haven't done DAP yet, is there still time? So you were supposed to submit information to DAP in stage 1. And at some point you entered a date that was the date that you initiated that consultation. So if you haven't done that, I'm not sure what that date meant to you. But yes, go ahead and reach out to DAP. You can still do that. You need to submit the EZ form. This is linked in the guidelines. So you fill it out, describe your project, you send it to the 2102@dahp.wa.gov email. All of this is in the guidelines, and then they will respond to you. And then you'll upload that information in stage 2. But you need to, before you can move forward to stage 2, I need to hear from DAP saying that you contacted them. So that has to happen now.
Yeah, I'm a total rookie and I don't know. I put the date down on the day I was actually working on the application and I must have forgotten to go back. But is there still time though? I mean, I know that they have to review that as well. So do you think there's enough time between now and then in order and when the grant's due to do that?
Yes. Yep. It's usually 4 to 6 weeks. So that's why we make you do it now before we move you to stage 2. So that's exactly why we make you start right now, because we don't want a bunch of people with 2 weeks before June 7th saying, I need you to review this now that my grant is due. So we have you do it in stage 1, and that gives them 8 to 10 weeks while you're working on other parts of stage 2 that they can respond. So yeah, there should be enough time.
Okay, thank you.
But sooner the better. All right. Can we include indirect costs? Can you, Sam, can you explain what you meant by indirect costs? Sam still on the call?
Yep, here we go. Sorry. Can you hear
There
me?
he is. Yep.
So when you do applications like, interpretive grant with the National Endowment for Humanities or something like that, one of the categories you're able to include is indirect costs, which is like some of the administrative expenses around the administration of the grant, or, so like office space or heating or lighting. Sometimes, some museums might use 5% of whatever the overall project budget is as an indirect cost, because you incur other expenses as you pursue your grant funded project, but they're not, and they're related to administering that project, but they're not like specific budget lines a contractor put this roof on.
So no, the ones that you described just now are not eligible. There are some other types of indirect costs that you can include, like tax on the materials and the work, and permitting costs and other things like that, that can be included. It has to be directly related to the physical work. And I see David has unmuted himself. Go ahead, David.
That was an accident.
Okay. I was like,
Okay,
I'm sure
thank you.
David will have comments about this, but yeah. So generally speaking, administrative costs are not applicable for Heritage Capital in any way. So
Actually, I do. And it's kind of just a general statement. Anytime you're talking about a percentage of something that's not validated, we're not going to accept it.
Yep. That's
like percentage. A lot of people want to do a percentage of a salary, and it's just not, there's no way, because there's no way for us to tell for sure that that person was working on that the whole time.
Because you have no way to audit it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just you could say you'd spent your entire salary of your entire staff for the whole project, and we can't verify it.
Sam brings up a good point. So as a state agency, we get audited every year. Not everything gets audited every year, but we get auditors that come and say, show us the documentation that the money was spent, how it was supposed to be spent, and that you made sure that it was, and the documents that you looked at to make sure it was spent correctly. And so that's why we ask you for all these documents, is because we have to show the auditors that we are stewards of the public funds. So yes, David is correct that we don't accept percentages. So if you are planning for anyone who is an employee of your organization to be contributing their time to your capital project, and you're wanting to count what you're paying them as your match, they will have to do timesheets that specifically every single day and hour that they're spending, they have to record that specifically, and you have to show that to us. So it can't be like, oh, so and so worked on this project over the last 6 months and spent like 1 day a week, so it's 20%. We don't accept that. It has to be contemporaneously documented, specifically what time was spent and what was done. So it's a lot of extra work. but that's what we have to do if it's an internal person. All right. Next, Lynn asks, we have a very large project. HCP and match funding will pay for a portion. Do we need to outline the entire project in the budget and scope, or only the HCP and match portion? Only the HCP and match portion. In fact, that's what I would recommend, because if you have a large project and you're doing a portion of it now, and then there's a portion of it later, maybe you might come back for another HCP grant at some point in the future. And so only include the portion that's HCP and match that you're wanting to spend now. And then in the future, all the rest of those expenses could potentially be counted for something in the future, or match for, you know, if it has to be done, if it has to be accomplished sooner rather than later, the way that we allow you to count past match, that could still be match for a future application. Great question, Lynn. Holly says, what about the 25 that isn't committed yet? And I think, can you explain what your question?
Yeah. It was the detailed level of documentation for 75%, and then you have other 25%. Do we need to enter anything about that at all?
Nope. Not until we contract. So in a year, after the legislature approves the list of funds and they say, yes, go ahead, then we start contracting. And for anyone who is only at 75%, we'll say, go back into your application and add the 25% with the same level of documentation now. So right now you don't have to do anything, but in the future, we will ask you to show the documentation at the same level for the rest. So for now, nothing, but in the future, it'll be the same. Good question. All right. Can the land we build on be used for match if it is donated by a local tribe? Depends on when it was donated. If it was donated within the last 6 years, yeah, the value of that land donation, which you can determine either through a professional assessment, or that's not the right word. There's a specific real estate word for it.
Appraisal.
But anyway, appraisal. There it is. Thank you, Michelle. That's exactly right. A professional appraisal, or whatever value is listed on the county's page, which is usually is lower than market value. So if you want to try to count the full market value, you would want an appraisal. But keep in mind that if land is donated, that's an in-kind match. And so that can only, if your grant is above 100,000, that can only be half your match. You'll have to find other ways and other cash that's going to your project as well. So it can't be your full match if it's a big project. I see David is answering some of these. Fundraising donations okay for match. I even see evening fundraising event on an example. Yes. So Steve, yes, fundraising donations, just general small dollar or larger dollar donations, totally fine. Yep, those are just private donations going to your organization. That's great. Why is such a detailed match necessary? Asks Holly Chamberlain. I understand about not wanting using state funds as match. Do we need to meet some kind of audit to which the WSHS is subject? Yeah, so it's a little bit of both, in the sense of what we want to avoid is you saying, oh, we have all this match, and then we get it, the legislature awards you money, and then turns out, oh, we thought we did, but we don't, or we spent it on something else, or you know, that money then is tied up in this project, which now cannot happen when we received 67 applications, and not all of those applications are going to be able to be funded. And so if you say you have match, but you actually don't, or it's not eligible match, and you can't use it, and you can't use the funds, then you've taken that away from someone else. So I don't want this to be something that's really onerous. I mean, it kind of already is by nature of having to provide documentation. But if you have questions about what document is needed, it basically just needs to be something that shows us what you're basing that number on, and that you're not just pulling that number out of thin air. So it doesn't have to be pages and pages and pages of bank statements or what, but like if you're claiming that you got a $20,000 grant, like show us that letter that says you got that grant, you know, and so that we understand that. So if you're having trouble on the documentation for your match and you feel like it's just a lot of work and you're wondering if you're doing it right, reach out and we can talk through that and try to create or help you put together enough information that it's not taking you too long, but that you're providing enough information to demonstrate that you do indeed have what you say you have. And I see the other Holly also had a similar comment. Yeah, so if, like I said, if there's you know, money that you've had in your accounts for a long time and it's hard to track like exactly where those funds have come from, perhaps there's a way we can sort of get confirmation from your fiscal officers, like, yes, this was earned over a period of time in these ways, and here's a demonstration of that number, rather than trying to detail every single donation that you've ever received. So Holly and Holly, if you have questions about specific revenue streams that you think is too onerous and too burdensome, please reach out and we will work out something that is more functional for you. Both have fairly large organizations and large projects. So
I do just on that example that you showed earlier, it was literally showing like a statement of donors with their names and dollar amounts that were relatively small dollar amounts. You know, we're not talking about like a $20,000 donation. It was like $75 donation. And that just like really surprised me to see that that level is what you're looking for, because you know, that level of donation isn't something we're providing to the IRS as far as who gave this amount of money and how much they gave. So it just seems, yeah, it seems like it really, in some ways, is tying the applicant's hands in a certain way to say, okay, you know, right now, okay, I've committed these things, but then after I've submitted this application to you, a grant comes in that would fund this, except I've already committed these things. So that's
so that brings up a good point, Holly, that we do not track the income dollars through to the expenses. So we are not saying, so if you list a certain amount of income from donations as cash that you have on hand because you received donations over a period of time, we're not going to have you assign that to a certain part of your project and say, okay, you used these exact dollars on that exact expense, and therefore you have to demonstrate that that happened. We don't do that. We don't track it at that level. Mainly what we want to show at this stage is that you have the money that you say you do to spend on the project. And once we list that in the contract saying you have the money from these 5 sources, then after that contract is signed and after we move forward, then all we're looking for then is expense documentation. What physical capital work did you do? We don't make you connect it back to these individual lines that you've submitted. So if between now and later you do receive another grant, we can make that adjustment when we go into contracting, as far as like, okay, well, we're not going to use the cash on hand from donations. We actually just got this nice big grant. We're going to use that instead as our match for this project. So share screen real quick. So in the application, or excuse me, contract, we do list out the source of available funds. So this is the attachment in the contract that information will go into. Now, you're not listing every $75 donation here. What you're listing is fundraising campaign over a certain time, which was a certain amount together. So if you are not able to provide, like if you have some other documentation, like in your accounting software that says we did this campaign, or we got this many donations from this many members over this many years, and this is the total, that's probably sufficient. We don't need to see every single dollar amount. But for a lot of organizations, you know, their software is not sophisticated enough that they can do that. It's like, these are the donations that we got over this period of time, and this is what we're using. So it really depends on your financial documentation and what makes sense for your organization. So again, we're not listing the $75 amounts here, but we are listing the total, and we want to see how you got to that total. And if you're listing, you know, $500,000 worth of individual donations at $75 a piece, that's going to be a lot of pages. So talk to us. Maybe that doesn't make sense for you to document it that way, and we can work with you on that. All right. Peggy, what about a loan used to pay for costs of our past backstage rebuild? So you're not going to like this answer. Loans are not an eligible expense unless you enter into the loan after you're awarded the grant. So that's the rule in the RCW, and it's unfortunate. All right. Steve,
so I answered that differently, and I took it to mean if the work was done on a loan, or if there was a loan taken out to do the work. So disregard my response to that then.
Well, so there's two different things here, right? We're talking about paying off a loan. So you're paying money to the bank versus paying a contractor that you have financed through a loan. That's fine. The contractor piece, like if you paid a contractor to do it, like I guess that would be the income would be a loan.
No, folks use loans to finance the work, even if they have the money, and that's what I was assuming they were doing.
Peggy, I see you're unmuted. Did you have something
Well,
else?
when you're asking the source of the funds for some of the work, the source of the funds was a small loan, included a small loan that we're now paying off, but it wouldn't be the paying off part, but as a source of income for the backstage rebuild that's part of our match. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's fine. So the loan is the source, but the expenses are to the contractor, and you're not sending us the bills you're sending to the bank. You're just sending us later in the reimbursement. You're sending us the bills that the contractor paid, but the loan is an income. Yeah, that's fine. Because that's income, you're not expense. Yes. Steve asked about expensive hiring a fundraiser. Unfortunately not. No fundraising is eligible for HCP at all in any as income, as expense, as anything. So that is not a capital expense. Shelley asks, what's the best way to document a museum's entrance fees, membership income, and facility rentals used as match? So this kind of goes back to what Holly was talking about and the sort of level of detail. Mainly what we want to see is a report, some type of report that shows how you got to that number. So if you're able to run a report from your software, or like how did you get to that number? Show us how you got to that number. If that makes sense. Does that make sense, Shelley?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So the level of detail of report is can vary as depending on what it is. We just need to know how you got there. All right. And Holly, I see you've got a couple more comments in here. So if Holly, if you have more specific questions after this conversation, I'd be happy to chat more with you about the level of documentation detail. Could hours spent by a planning committee developing the project be used as volunteer match? So Jane, this is a little bit of a sticky question. It depends on what you mean by developing the project. So, and this is a little bit of a gray area. If it's general planning, like organizational planning, general stuff at a board meeting, typically no. But if it's a meeting specifically about the project, you're going on site, you're talking about it, that you're making plans and you're talking to contractors, that time as volunteers can be counted as long as it's recorded. Those specific hours on that specific date, we're discussing these specific things. Those can be. What gets into a gray area is like, oh, well, we talked about the project at a board meeting and we talked about 17 other things, you know, like that isn't really eligible. It has to be meetings and efforts specifically to the capital project. With you projects, you've got a lot of projects. Yeah. Steve, it is difficult for all volunteer history organizations to compete with paid employees of cities and the paid history staff. Yeah, Steve, that's a good point. And we try to mitigate that a little bit by having the opportunity of smaller projects under 100,000 can be all in kind. That's one way we try to assist with that. But if you have other ways of other ideas for how we could make this grant more accessible to smaller all volunteer organizations, we would certainly be open to that feedback. All right. Will the decisions be final prior to the September public meeting, or is there negotiation that could affect the outcome during the meeting? From Sonia. So the final decisions are made at the September meeting. So what happens is that we do our preliminary review, which is just like, are all the documents attached? Does the match work? Have they provided everything that we asked for? And then that gets forwarded to the panel. They review it and score it. They come to the meeting, discuss, and decide on final scores. Once those decisions are so I should have clarified earlier that the panel meeting is not, it's a public meeting in the sense that it's open to the public, but it's not in the sense that there's comments and presentation from applicants. It's just the discussion of the panel. So I think your question, nothing else can be submitted after the June 7th deadline unless we have a specific question for you as we do as staff reviews. And it's like, maybe you accidentally double uploaded a document, like we'll ask about that. But typically there's not really any negotiation that happens. Lynn asks if contracts can be issued prior to July 1st so the funding is available that day. No and yes. The contract cannot be issued before July 1st, but we can draft it and have it ready to go. And then the morning of July 1st, you sign it and Jennifer Kilmer signs it, and then expenses that day can count. So if we do the legwork ahead of time and have it literally the draft ready to go, we do signatures via DocuSign so we can have it signed the morning of that day, and then those expenses can count. So we can't sign it before July 1st, but we can sign it early on July 1st as long as it's all pre-written. All right, Angela asks if we need to make corrections and corrections were submitted and under review, then would we know if we officially made it to round 2 if our grant portal shows under round 2? So Angela, the stage one is a little bit of a back and forth. So you submit, we respond, you submit, we'll respond or forward you. So we'll need to, if you've resubmitted, I'll need to review to see if you responded to my first round of comments. So it's a little bit of a back and forth. We will let you know for sure, you know, as we continue to review. We won't just leave you hanging out there. Kelly asks, if one donor gives 15,000 but will make 2 payments of 7,500 over 2 years, is that reported as smaller donations of less than 10,000? That sounds like 2 small donations of less than 10,000 to me. So that can be included in a longer list. Mariah asks, for the date of match, is the date of the check, the date of the award notice was made, or the date it was deposited? That is not, that can be whatever makes sense to you. Probably the date you received the money, the date it was awarded is the best. There is no, so this is going to be a little confusing. Hopefully this doesn't confuse people. There's no past restriction of date for the income piece. The 6 years only applies to the expenses that you later have. So if you had a capital campaign 10 years ago and you've just been saving that money sitting in your savings account, like you could still use that money. There's no past date. So we just want to know basically the details of the income and when it was earned. So it's probably the date it was received is best, but we're not going to be like checking that against that 6-year time frame because that only applies to expenses. All right, Valerie asks, if this is subsequent stage of an ongoing project to phases 2 and 3, would you like details in the narrative of work already completed, or should we focus on what is happening in this specific part of the project? Are there different areas in this application to separate those two? Valerie, there's not really areas to separate. So I would say it would be good to give like a brief context of these are the things that were previously done and now we're working on this. But if you're asking for money that's covering multiple phases and some phase is going to be matched, like you do need to describe all of that. So the grant and the match as well. So I think you'll have to just kind of incorporate that into the narrative as part of sort of community value or planning in the sense of like, well, we accomplished phase 1 and 2, which, you know, included these things. But as far as like the timeline and the scope and all that stuff, that only applies to what is grant and match funded for this specific project. So was that your question, Valerie? Is she still here?
Yes, thank you. That clarified it a lot. So focus mainly on what we're asking money for and what we're matching when it comes to the work. And then
Correct.
you can, like in a preamble, you can mention it's part of a continuing project. Thank you.
Exactly. Yep. Perfect. So yeah, that can be in the summary, maybe a little bit, although the summary box is very short, or in the narrative piece at the end. All right, Joan asks, once the contract is in place, do we need to get permission to do other things in the museum during the 13-year period? For example, repair on the electrical system. No, we don't necessarily, unless it's a very major project and you have historical designation, and this might affect that. So in that case, yes, but other general maintenance, upgrades, upkeep, no, you don't need approval from us. Yeah, if you have a historic building and you want to do a big addition to it or do some major big campus renovation in the future, then you should reach out to us and let us know and work with us, and also work with DAP on that. But for general stuff, nope, we just want to make sure that the building is being taken care of and that it's still functioning in the way that you said it would be functioning.
Yeah, the exception is if you're removing anything that was paid for by the grant or used as match.
Yes, good point. If that is happening, let us know. And we will talk about it. Shannon asks, for organization's operating budget, should we use the most recent year? Yes. And Lua's making comments on the OFM percentage. Like we said, we'll get more information on that. Shannon asks, project management for the work appears to be an eligible expense. If we have an experienced project manager who plans to volunteer, how should we document that as 75% match? And there's a specific rate we should use. Same applies for general volunteer. We have someone who plans to put in 40 hours per month for the next year. Understand the rate is 37 per hour. So if your project manager is it depends on what you mean by experienced. Were they a professional project manager in their professional life? If so, then yes, they could use a rate that they would have charged. But if they're just a volunteer who's managed a few things for the org, then no, then they are they're restricted to that $37 per hour rate. So there needs to be some demonstration that this person was a professional project manager to use a higher rate. And that is documented for the income. That would be basically, you know, you'd estimate the number of hours that they would donate and multiply that by the appropriate rate and include that as a match income item in your form. All right, Michelle, I've received and uploaded a letter from DAP. Do I need to go back and fill in the EZ form even though the status shows in the letter? So Michelle, what did you send to DAP?
I sent an email to the person that you, first I talked to you and you recommended that I contact the person at DAP, and she sent me a formal letter that said that our property was not designated as a historical property. And I uploaded that for the eligibility review.
So then I would and I'm sorry, I don't remember your exact documents in your application. But so what I would say is, because you did not submit an EZ form, go ahead and just attach a copy of your email that you sent them as
Okay.
the EZ form, and then attach the letter as the letter. Does that make sense?
Again, attach it again.
If it's already in there, you don't need to attach it again.
Okay.
But do make
Thank
sure
you.
it's in the right spot if it's according to the guidelines.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a little bit of an unusual situation, but makes sense for a non-eligible building. So, all right. Carmel says admin overhead costs. I don't know what you mean by that. Do you want to expound a little bit? And I'm realizing we're already at noon. So I'm happy to stay on and continue to go through the chat, but is there anyone who definitely has to leave at noon who has a question they want to ask out loud? Give a couple seconds for that. Okay, well, oh, go ahead, Jeff.
For culture grant can be used as match.
Yep, that's a county grant, so that's great.
Got it. I thought
Yep.
so. I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Good question. Good question. Oh, that was actually the next one. So great. All right, Emily, could you speak about how much community value, both in the answers to the questions and letters of support, should refer to the specifics of the project versus the value of the organization's programming to the community? For example, replacing the roof in a historic theater, it's the theater that's valued by the public, no leaks if it's just taken for granted. I think you have to describe both the value of the project to the building, right? Like a roof is a very, very important component of a historic building. And then also describe the value of the building to the community. I guess, are you asking for like a percentage of what to focus on? Can you explain a little bit more, Emily, about what you're wondering there?
Just that a lot of all the questions about community value are speaking to the project itself, but I can imagine when we ask for, let's say, the mayor, a letter of support of the project to preserve the historic building, it would be I mean, does it have to be specific about, oh yes, and the organ and the carpets and the seats and the, that isn't what I would expect the mayor to be saying. I would expect the mayor to be saying, oh my gosh, how important this institution is to our community. So that's where kind of what I'm asking.
Got it. Yeah. So I think you as the applicant do need to sort of, you know, communicate. It's important to have a roof and seats and stuff for this building to function. I think for the community value section, it should focus a little bit more on the value to the broader community. I mean, it's a combination, but there are several questions in here that kind of speak to the significance of the property in the community. Yeah, I don't think all of your letters need to specifically address every single piece of the project, all the details. So you'll have to find a balance there of like what you're describing, the physical needs of the project, and also the community value from your perspective as the organization, but also from public support as well.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. And then Joan also asked about the loan as part of a match. So yes, with the caveat that you can't submit loan payments as expenses. You'll have to only submit the project expenses later. And then the loan piece is going to be a different financial obligation that is handled by the organization outside of the grant process. David asks, will budgeted funds count on match if not expended prior to grant application submittal, but spent by grant contracting? Yeah, so I think what you're asking is if there are expenses between when you submit the application to when we contract, if those can count as match, which the answer is definitely yes. But they can only count as match. We can't reimburse those. So yeah, if you've done some past work, that can count as match up to July 1st of 2019. And then in the year between when you submit your application to when we can contract with you, if you do more work in there, that's fine. It just can only be match expenses. Joan asks, is a capital campaign consultant considered a fundraiser? Yes, unfortunately. If the capital campaign is to earn money for the capital campaign, that would be fundraising. David asks, if this is a large project and we anticipate applying for this grant more than one time, should we exclude potential future work from this application, even though we already have planned to complete the work in the future? Essentially, this is phase 1 and then phase 2. Yes, exclude phase 2 work from this application. Only include what you are planning to use for grant or match for the specific dollars that you're requesting now. I think in the narrative you could mention, and in the future we have some plans for these other improvements also, but do not include it in your budget or your scope or anything like that. For the budget and the scope, focus on the dollars that you're requesting and the work that you're going to use as match. Jane says, our donations are in our general fund and this fund will be used to finance our project. The balance of the account is cumulative based on our income and expenses. How many years of income should be used? So yeah, Jane, this is an example of let's chat about your specific situation and the amount you've got in your account and kind of how that was earned over which years. And if, you know, and if basically through chatting with you and generally understanding your income and where it's come from, we can figure out what documentation makes sense for you and not be too onerous in representing that. All right, a couple people had to hop off. That's fine, no worries. All right. Peggy asked, should we receive funding from HCP? Can my time as project manager preparing documentation for reimbursement be used as match? No. So reimbursement and administrative, just sort of general tasks related to the grant are not eligible. It has to be project work spent on the project itself. All right, a couple of people saying they'll email me the specific questions, which is great. Helen, do you prefer our timeline and project categories be based on the areas of the project scope, such as the auditorium, backstage, exterior? Would you like to see all historic repair and preservation as a category? Helen, this is going to vary by project. My instinct from what you've listed here is yes, it would be good to separate out by space. I'm assuming because that work is going to be a little bit different in every single space. What we would like to, what our goal is, let me phrase it this way, is to be able to clearly see the invoices you're receiving from your contractor and see the scope of work that's in your application, compare those and confirm that you're doing what you said you'd do, and do that in a sequenced way that makes sense with how the contractor is getting work done and how you're submitting your reimbursements. So the idea is basically however it's phased, if they're going to move space to space, or if they're going to do all the electrical all at once, and then they're going to do all the plumbing all at once, then I would say basically organize it in the way that you anticipate the work will be accomplished, if that makes sense. And that's going to vary a lot for really large projects, especially. Lynn, to be clear, HCP funds can only fund work that occurs after contracting, not repayment of loan for prior work. That is correct. That is correct. Only work that occurs after contracting, and it can only go toward the expenses, not the repayment of a loan, unless the loan was taken out after the grant was awarded, which, you know, is usually practically not feasible. Okay. Lots of thanks in the chat. Great. This is a complex process, and as we talked about earlier, with a lot of documents that we ask for and detail that we ask for. So I appreciate everyone's willingness to learn and work with us on this. So as I said, what for the match income especially, and this is a bit of a sticking point I think for folks. What we're interested in is a demonstration of how you've come to those numbers. And so if there's a way that you can represent that without listing out every $75 donation, that's fine. Talk to us, ask us, send me a report example, and we'll work with you to make sure that it's the amount of detail works for you, and that that we can be confident that the money came from where you said it came from. So, all right. We're less than 10 minutes over. I'll just open it up for a few more minutes for questions if folks want to say anything out loud or ask anything out loud before we wrap up here. All right, I'm not seeing any hands. So I think the sort of moral of the story is, if you're I've said this to many of you through the stage 1 process, if you're sitting and frustrated and not sure what we're looking for or what we expect, don't sit for 3 hours and be frustrated. Give me a call. Well, don't give me a call, send me an email first. That'll be a little easier. And ask us the question, because if we can answer it in 5 to 10 minutes, I would much rather you spend that time with you than having you just be frustrated for 3 or 4 hours and trying to figure out what we're asking for. So what we want is for everyone to submit the strongest application that they can, and with the right information to communicate to us and to the panel that you've got the funds and the planning in place to be able to have a really successful project. So reach out. Of course, we can't review an entire application or write anything for you, but if you want to send us some text or some documents and be like, am I on the right track here with this type of thing or that type of thing, we're more than happy to give you feedback on pieces that you're working on putting together. So don't hesitate. Please reach out. We're here to help. The more we can help you get into a better spot, the easier reviewing for us and for the panel is going to be later. So. All righty. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and send y'all out a link to this so you can refer to it if you want to again. And And then of course use those guidelines. It's all spelled out really detailed in there. I'm sorry that they're pretty long, but tried to make them really really useful and helpful. But again, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and I'm sure we'll be chatting soon in the emails and in Flex. So take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.